Dana, it is so great to have you here.
Thank you. I feel like this is a long time in coming. At some point, we were going to connect.
We were going to connect. I feel like we've been in the same room. In fact, I know we've been in the same room before. So it is great to be connected here partially through our mutual friend, Lauren Fritz.
Gotta love the Fritz.
Love the Fritz. Fritz was like, this is a return to Dana's roots. She's got the radio microphone. She was a country music DJ.
That's right. And I love a small world story and mutual friends, like realizing those connections. Not only is that a great thing personally and professionally, but I also think it gives you a little insight as to what God has planned.
Yes. Sometimes you're just like, there's no way this was all done by random,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So you have your new book out, your latest book, with a collection of advice from your colleagues, your friends, your mentors, your husband.
Yes.
As well as our mutual friend, Lauren Fritz. Fritz, by the way, listens to every single podcast. So
I know she does.
I wanted to give her some shout out.
She told me, I started following you on Instagram years ago, but then I started listening to the podcast about a year ago. And because she was saying, you have to listen to this, it's great. And she was right. I'm a podcast enthusiast. So congratulations.
Well, by the way, that is a high honor from somebody who is in the profession, in news. I try to hold myself to high standards, but the fact that somebody in news is listening, especially someone who's been steeped in politics at the highest levels. So I appreciate that, Dana.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about your path to where you are today. I mean, you mentioned as a young child you wanted to be a gymnast.
I did. Yes, I did. It was funny. So a book like this takes, any book takes about a year to 18 months before it comes out. Right.
It's a very long process. I don't think people realize that from concept to selling the book, to publishing the book, to editing the book. I mean, it's a couple of years. And
printing. So when the hard copy arrived a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at it and I thought, oh my gosh, I told that story about Kathy Rigby. And so for the young people out there, you might not remember, Kathy Rigby was an Olympic gymnast. And in, I think the 1976, it must have been the 1980 Olympics. I was in third grade and I was a tumbler. I'm not going to say I was a gymnast, but I was on the gymnastics team and I really loved it. And in mentoring circles, especially for girls, they say you have to see her to be her. Okay, so my gym teacher and my librarian at my elementary school knew that I really liked Kathy Rigby, and she'd come out with a book. And so then I checked her book out at the library and I read the whole thing. I remember that book. I remember the smell of the library. I can feel all of those senses still to this day. And I think back on that now as I mentor a lot of different people, young women and also young men, but it all starts with somebody taking an interest in you and being willing to help. And at this point in my career, I'm definitely at a place where there are more years behind me than there are in front of me when it comes to my career. Though I love what I'm doing and I have a lot of goals and I'm kind of in a hurry to get a lot of it done, I just felt that right now was a good time to refresh not only my thinking and my advice, but to be honest and say, I don't have all the answers, but I have access to a lot of smart people who are willing to answer questions that I had on a range of different topics when it comes to career and life advice, from everything like deciding what you want to do, deciding whether you should start, stay, or leave a job, and deciding what to do even in retirement.
Yeah, it was great. It was a wide variety. It was your colleagues at Fox, some co-hosts of yours on The View, Dirk Bentley, who you mentioned, Mike Rowe.
The Five, but we do make fun of The View a lot.
Oh, did I just say The View?
Yes, but that's pretty funny. It is The Five.
You guys play a lot of clips from The View.
We play so many.
So
but you know what? They give us a ton of material.
Maybe that's one of their goals. You guys are helping their viewership. So you begin with these ambitions as a gymnast.
Yeah.
And you get to become White House press secretary and now a journalist and an anchor of Fox News. Take me on that route and your interest. Because, for me growing up, for some reason I was really into the news. Like from 5 years old, I want to be a weatherman. I was into watching Murphy Brown and West Wing. I was sort of inspired by certain primetime shows.
Murphy Brown, that was a great show. Well, I grew up in Wyoming and Colorado. My dad grew up on a ranch, and my family still ranches that ranch in Newcastle, Wyoming, though my mom and dad moved to Denver when I was a kid. That's where I was a gymnast. And I had to make a choice. A lot of kids do, right? In like 5th grade. What do you want to do? You have to make a choice. Are you
that early?
Well, I think it was like, that's what I recall.
Yeah.
Are we playing piano or are we doing gymnastics? I chose the wrong one. I said gymnastics. I should have continued in piano, even though
we all should have.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So It became pretty clear in about 8th grade that I was not going to the Olympics. Okay, everyone could do a lot better than me in gymnastics. Also, I wasn't dedicating the time that that you obviously need.
It's a job as a child.
Yes, that was not happening. But I joined the speech team. Back up, starting in the 3rd grade, my dad, who was a news enthusiast, okay, we got all the newspapers, all the magazines, all of it. I had to read the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post, starting in the 3rd grade, every day before he came home from work, and I had to choose 2 articles to discuss before dinner. So we were a very newsy family. On Sundays, I loved watching 60 Minutes so much that I would not want to go outside in the late afternoon, evening. We were mountain time, so everything was a little bit earlier. So my dad would set the alarm on the stove to ring 10 minutes before 60 Minutes was going to start. So I could get inside, get downstairs, and get in my position to be able to watch 60 Minutes. And even from there, I joined the speech team. I always talked to my mom and dad about politics, current events, things like that, and studied journalism in college, went to college on a speech team scholarship. I did extemporaneous speaking, which was not debate, but was more analyzing quickly news topics that you would then give it a 5 to 7 minute speech on. And I look back and I think that all served me very well.
Good, great training for today. Great training for basically your entire career.
My life. Yeah.
Yeah. I was struck by, getting back into the book here, Trey Gowdy, former congressman.
So his contributions in this book are incredible.
Very deep, right? Very thoughtful. And he talks about, and I think it's a theme among a couple folks in the book, define a significant life for yourself and pursue that, even if the trappings, what others call success, never come. Basically, success is one thing, but it can be hollow if you're not doing something that matters to you.
Yes. So one of the reasons I chose some of the people in the book is that over the course of my career and life, I've met people, and you get to talk to people, especially on a campaign. There's many hours where you talk to people. And I remember Trey Gowdy talking to me about the difference between success and significance. And he is a little bit of a deep guy, like a deep thinker. And I loved that because one person's success is not necessarily your definition of success, but what really matters in the end, which is one of the chapters in the book, is significance. And I think I'm probably maybe too reflective, right? I like to think about things, analyze, am I doing okay? Where am I in life? Am I doing okay? Am I making a significant contribution? And that thinking helped me sort of reevaluate. It's not so much volume and output as it is meaningful significance.
I mean, it's one of the reasons, too, why we and why people we know choose the business that we're in, especially politics and media, that a lot of it has to do with, I mean, certainly if you get to a certain echelon of media, like money and prominence and fame comes with it. But for most folks, it's about the impact you can have.
Right. Well, one of the reasons Trey Gowdy talks about the difference between success and significance is because he wrote a book called Start, Stay, or Leave, which is an excellent book about decision making. He was a very successful prosecutor. He decided to run for Congress. He ran for Congress. He's a very good congressman, but he did not feel like he was making a significant difference. And he made the decision, a tough decision, to leave and go and do something else. And I really admire that. Like, how to know when to pivot and to try something new. Like maybe you feel stuck in your career, or you're not getting the promotions, or you're just wanting to do something completely different. But also, if you feel like you are not making a difference, if you're not having some sort of significant contribution that you can add to your accomplishments list, then you should probably try something else.
I find it interesting that, that was his view of Congress. And certainly we know other members of Congress who have left Washington because they feel like they're not able to accomplish much up there. You began your career in Washington. One of the first jobs was on Capitol Hill. Talk to me about that choice, the lessons you took away from that, and then how that brought you to the White House.
Yeah, so I actually thought I wanted to be a local news anchor in a prominent market, and I started working in local news, and I thought, well, how in the world do you succeed here? How do you move up? And it's tough. People do it. Yeah. But it's a slog.
Well, it's a whole route. I mean, there's a whole the traditional route. I mean, pre-social media was like you begin in the small market and you're carrying the camera with you, and then you move up to market 120.
So
market
I think that you're
right?
too young to remember this, but there was a thing called 1-800-Media Line?
Okay, I am too young.
So you're too young. So when you were looking for a job before the internet and in the news business, you would call 1-800-Media Line, and they would list the jobs that were available in the different media markets. And then you would write down a number, and then you would use that number to try to find out more about that particular job, on and on. So I was doing that going, well, I love the West. I grew up in Wyoming and Colorado, but did I want to go to Idaho for 3 years? And then what? And then what? And then what? And I had just gotten a graduate degree, and I'm trying to find a way to say this that doesn't sound pretentious. I know, because I don't want it to, but I was like, I want to succeed. And I don't see how you do that here. I didn't see a path. And not to get too deep, I just prayed about it. And my worry was that if I didn't pursue a job in local media, like my plan, the whole thing I had planned out, then I was never going to get to work in media. Obviously, that turns out not to be true. Here I am talking about this with you. But at the time, my horizons were quite small. But I didn't want to stay in that particular local news market. I wasn't sure. My dad was so great about it. He said, come on home. So I did what every good graduate student does. I went home, lived in my parents' basement, waited tables. And a couple months later, there was a job offer in Washington, D.C. And that's when I thought, wow, that's really cutting the cord. That means you're never going to work in TV.
Little did you know.
And so I was answering the phones for a congressman. I ended up going to a hockey game. The guy next to me said, what do you want to do in Washington? I said, I'd love to work my way up to be a House press secretary one day. I did not say White House. House press secretary one day. He eventually, well, like within 10 days, I got the new job. So I went from answering phones for a congressman for 6 weeks to being the spokesperson for a congressman. I had no idea what I was doing. My best mentor at the time was Holly Probst, the chief of staff, who was a great writer, great thinker. She had gone to law school at night, and I learned a ton from her. Spent 3 years on Capitol Hill, which I highly recommend to all young people spending some time on Capitol Hill. Maybe just an internship is all you need, but it's so important to understand how a bill becomes a law, to understand more of our rich and amazing history in America, have some respect for it, be able to talk a little bit more fluently about it. But the best part about it is, to this day, every single day, I still talk to some of my friends from that time. And they have helped me in my life. They're my friends professionally and personally. And so I highly recommend everyone spend a little time on Capitol Hill. I
should mention, I went to GW for undergrad. First day of my internship, sophomore year, I began my press internship for Dick Durbin.
Oh, wow.
Because I was from outside Chicago.
Yeah.
It was 9/11, Dana. The first day of my internship.
Your first day?
The first day of my Capitol Hill internship was Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. We evacuated the Capitol that morning.
Wow.
Which was like, by the way, talk about an experience being an intern that full semester.
Did they send you home?
They sent us home.
Yeah.
But like, I still remember I still think about the fact that morning I took the metro back to campus. Naturally,
right.
Like not realizing everything that was happening around me.
And you were so young.
And I was a young kid. And I get back to campus, and my first call actually is the college newspaper that comes to the line. And like, what are you doing? Like, go out there and report. But I will say that like being an intern, like it was that semester, especially that was the semester of anthrax and all of that was happening up there. But
and one of the things that's very interesting is that very day, wasn't Dick Durbin on the committee that was hearing the testimony from Laura Bush about No Child Left Behind?
To be honest with you, I believe so. I was getting my pass.
I think so. I think so, yeah.
I just remember they were coming back from the Capitol, and then they evacuated the office buildings, and then he was headed back to the townhouse he lived in with Chuck Schumer, another member of Congress, and I think some staffers went there, but I was like, I'm going to go back to my dorm.
It really is interesting for me career-wise. I work with Greg Gutfeld, of course, and Bill Hemmer regularly, and they're the same age, just slightly older than me. And we have similar experiences and memories from that day, and it's so vivid, right? And in some ways, you can think of your life before 9/11 and after 9/11. We work with some young people now that were babies on 9/11.
We're getting to the point where the next group of college grads weren't born.
They don't remember. It's like us learning about the Vietnam War.
I mean, I remember like I went to school at George Washington University, GW, where like we'd have alum from the 70s. And I was like, what was it like during Vietnam? Right. Like, and now, of course, they're asking the same question.
I remember in high school, I had this history class and my dad said, what are you guys studying now? And I said, oh, it's the history of Vietnam. He's like, the history?
So first day of my internship is 9/11. You make your way to the White House.
Yes.
Or, sorry, to the administration soon after.
Right. So 9/11 happened and my girlfriends from Capitol Hill, from my great time there where I made friends and made connections, and before Facebook or anything, I stayed in touch with them by postcard because I knew it was important to have a network, I guess intuitively. Plus, I like them. They're my friends. And my girlfriend, Mindy Tucker, was working for Attorney General John Ashcroft at the Justice Department. And I had reached out to say, are you guys okay? And she said, are you still willing to come back to DC because I need another spokesperson? And I said, yeah. I started packing while we were on the phone. And I spent 9 or 10 months at the Justice Department and then got pulled over to the White House Council on Environmental Quality, January 2005, go to be the deputy press secretary, and then took over for Tony Snow after that.
Talk to me about that role, because we get it through, most people experience it through the literal press secretary. Some people experience it through television, CJ Craig and the various people who've played it on TV shows. Let us in on what that job entails.
It entails everything, like every bit of you, every part of you. It is an amazing, wonderful experience. It's also completely maddening and aging. But empowering, and you learn so much and you're responsible for so many things. And I worked for George W. Bush. I didn't come from politics. I didn't come from money. I didn't have an Ivy League degree. I remember a couple of times having imposter syndrome that I write about a little bit in the book too. Of one time, him asking me a question and I thought, he's asking me? My God, what do I know? But growing in confidence over time and thinking about being at the table with my dad in 3rd grade and having to discuss the articles that I had picked out and why I thought the way I thought and what great training that was later on. And I do remember one time being on the helicopter, Marine One, and the president was asking the senior aides their opinion about something. And I knew that I had a different position than like Karl Rove and Barry Jackson that were there. And so I have to, here's what I think, sir, in front of them. A little intimidating. And as we were landing, he looked up and he said, she's exactly right. Now, I didn't say, in your face, Carl, but I remember thinking.
Have you since told him that?
I've written about it. And, that it was an 18-hour, 20-hour a day job. I loved every bit of it. It was where you could advocate for the president, defend the United States of America. I never thought of myself as the press secretary for the Republican Party. Never. There was an RNC for that. They could do that. And we kept politics pretty separate. Politics is a part of everything. But there was no campaigning. But also, I was in the 2nd term. So things were a lot different.
Yeah.
And I also would advocate and defend the press. Right? One of my rules is that if you want to complain about an article, you have to read it twice. Because usually the first thing you get mad at is the headline.
Mm-hmm.
The first read, you're like, mad. The second read, it's like, they got a point.
Fair? Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you think that the job's evolved? I mean, it's so interesting.
So much.
Right? I mean,
well,
you were still doing it, Twitter wasn't exactly a thing yet.
Not a thing at all. I didn't have.
The smartphone was still super new. I mean, we had Blackberries, but not iPhones.
Kind of miss the Blackberry still.
I all do.
I did not have a Twitter account or a Facebook account when I left the White House in January of 2009. Now, let's go back for a moment. In 1997, Mike McCurry was the press secretary for Bill Clinton, and he was a decider for bringing the cameras into the briefing room. Kind of broke the seal on that, right?
Oh, did they have a Supreme Court deal before? There were no video cameras inside the briefing room?
There were just there was no cameras in the briefing room. That was a place where you just got information.
Months before the Lewinsky scandal begins.
The day, this is like your 9/11 story in a way.
Yeah.
The day that cameras are allowed into the briefing room for the very first time was the day that the Drudge Report broke the Lewinsky scandal.
Wow.
It was the Drudge Report, right?
Yeah.
I know that's a controversy.
So it's a whole thing because Isikoff had it in Newsweek, but Newsweek wouldn't go with the story. And so I think Drudge ended up.
So let's give it to
first.
Drudge. Okay, so Drudge gets it. And that was the first day of cameras in the briefing room.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think that cameras in the briefing room have made things a lot worse, right?
And that's a Supreme Court argument against bringing cameras in there, by the way.
I'm against cameras in the Supreme Court. So it has changed a lot, for better and worse, right? Like, would it have been better if we could communicate directly to the American people rather than not having those tools?
Yeah.
Yeah. But is social media, I think that of it as a net plus for communicators, but there are obvious downsides.
Though, one of the things too, you just mentioned is like you were an advocate for the press internally.
Yeah.
It feels these days that it's so adversarial. I mean, I was just there last week. We happen to be part of Podcast Row at the White House. They're embracing new media. We spoke to a number of communications officials on Caroline Levitt's team, along with RFK Jr. and a few other folks. And it struck me the way that, they discuss the media. And so I just want to get your perspective on like why you think that went and to what extent, mentioning your former boss, President Bush, how much of it comes from the top down?
Probably a lot. Like you think about 41. First of all, 43 was furious with the press and how they treated his dad. Remember the wimp factor? You're maybe too young, but
so we're talking about the treatment of President Bush the first and like
how mad that made 43, the 43rd president, his 41 son. But vice versa. When you are the president, you kind of expect the criticism and it doesn't bother you as much. But if you're the father or the son of the president or the wife or the daughter, it hurts more.
Yeah.
And it's offensive. I think that the relationship with the press is naturally adversarial, and that's good, as it should be. And I think we are better off as a country when we have a good adversarial press. I think it's better when we have access. And I think the last 4 years under the Biden administration was just horrendous. Like they said, back to norms in the press office. Biden never talked to the press.
Yeah.
And then they would say, oh, he takes questions all the time. No, he doesn't. They tried to say that press conferences were being like shouting over the rotating blades of Marine One. That didn't cut it.
He went back to like the Ronald Reagan, like, I can't hear you.
And so as much as President Trump needles the press, and there's some adversarial relations, especially with, like, for example, the Associated Press right now.
Right.
The access that the press has to this administration is much greater than in the Biden administration. And if you think about the Hillary Clinton camp, do you know which media they can't stand? It's the New York Times. And it's so funny. I always try to remind people of that. Like, Republicans, you think you hate the New York Times? Hillary Clinton thinks that they tanked her whole campaign.
Yeah.
So I always feel like media stuff is in the eye of the beholder. Again, my rule of thumb before you complain about anything is read it twice. Headlines are a problem. I used to love the idea that I had suggested that reporters ought to have to be able to sign off and initial their headlines, because it would probably stop a lot of problems and anger. But this White House, this current White House, they are definitely willing to talk to a lot of press. They're not hiding from other cable news stations. They're on Fox a lot.
Yeah.
But I see them everywhere.
Yeah.
They are absolutely flooding the zone. And President Trump kind of got made fun of for it, but he made some good decisions that he wanted people in his cabinet who could communicate clearly to the American people. And he has that.
Well, several members of his cabinet came from Fox, honed their careers as communicators. And I think that's so vital. I think that's probably one of the lessons out of the Biden administration. One of the frustrations is like, why don't the American people know what we've accomplished on X, Y, and Z? And part of the issue was basic communication or lack of communication.
Yeah,
right?
and one of the things is, you think about RFK Jr., controversial guy, right? And he goes to Texas to talk about, provide a chance to talk about the measles outbreak, okay? Go back in the Biden administration. Remember the baby formula problem? No one wanted to own it there. The Domestic Policy Council apparently didn't tell the president about it. Health and Human Services blamed USDA. They were blamed. Nobody even did anything about it. They were just like, oh, that's a problem. Remember Biden saying, this is the first I'm hearing of it?
Yeah.
And it was pretty outrageous. The differences are pretty stark in terms of, all right, we've got a problem. We got to try to hit it head on. They might not get it right all the time, or they won't get it right all the time, but at least they're willing to talk.
I think the numbers are out in terms of like the number of questions that President Trump has taken already in his first, less than 100 days.
He loves it.
The press runs out of questions. It sort of reminds me, obviously they had they didn't like each other, but I had the chance to cover John McCain for a year, and we would sit on his bus and he would just go for 3 or 4 hours taking questions, to the point we'd run out of things where he's like, can I call your dad on his birthday? Like,
one of my favorite funny memories is President Bush being let's say that we had like an off the record with the press. You can come in more casual, right? Or he's doing an on the record interview. And then he would say, oh, wait, I'm going to tell you something off the record. So I would look at the reporter and be like, okay, this is off. And then the president would start talking again, but obviously it would be something that was on the record. So I'm like, we're back on. and then he would start going back into like something classified. I'm like, sir, nope, that's off the record. And it was just off, on, off, on, off. And there are still some reporters today that remember that and laugh about it.
Getting to the adversarial quality, like it comes, I mean, one thing that we often hear from our audience is the concern about the state of our democracy and the lack of trust in the media. And I wonder, given that you've been in the media and you've had the vantage point of working at the White House and working on Capitol Hill, you know, where we stand today now, it's actually incredible. If you look at the Gallup poll, and they ask every year, Americans, do you trust the media for your news? And if you look at the line chart, peak trust in the media, not surprisingly, was 1974, out of Watergate. 7 out of 10 Americans trust the news that they're getting. And it's a downward trajectory over time. And then you see like an extra downward trajectory in 2016, 2017. And you see an extra downward trajectory in 2020, 2021 out of COVID coverage. And I'm curious from your vantage point, having worn both hats, how much is the media to blame for this? How much is the fact that technology and platforms have changed? How much is it that like we have politicians shouting fake news? Like, is there blame to go around here?
Yes, I think there's blame to go around. You reminded me of something during a briefing one time. We were getting hammered for having low approval ratings. And I remember in the briefing room saying, there's only one entity that has lower approval ratings than Congress or the George W. Bush administration. And it's all of you. And just to make a point, and also probably to get out of whatever it was they were trying to ask me about.
It's a great way to get out of that.
I mean, like, you're worse than me. I think there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical of the press, but I also think that it's really important to be an omnivorous and voracious news consumer. You know, democracy is a participatory sport. So I get paid to read a lot of different news and to have that kind of well-rounded information flow. Not everybody has the time to do that, but it is incumbent upon people as citizens of the United States to be as informed as possible. And there's so many different ways to get news now. I think your platform is great in the way that you approach news. And I think that our audience certainly at Newsroom and the 5 and all across the Fox channel, it has grown. And we have more Democrats and independents that watch us than any other station. So we are starting to see even many more people being willing to come on the show. I'll give you an example. Not only that, but the platform of foxnews.com, for example, Bernie Sanders loves to put his op-eds on foxnews.com because it gets a ton of readership and his ideas get out there and about. And I think from my perspective, like, I want to see a lot more of that. From the consumer perspective or the citizen perspective, I do worry about it. But I think about, for example...
Well, especially, I mean, I'm not worried about the people who consume our consumers, your consumers. I'm more worried about the people who
Facebook?
are like, well, it's not even Facebook anymore. It's like a random TikTok account, and you're certainly seeing it generationally. Or random YouTubers. I mean, now it doesn't take much to become a news creator. It doesn't take any, you have a journalism degree, I have a degree, we have experience in this stuff. And that's the concerning thing at a time where we talk about the lack of trust in media, calling out the media, fake news. People are going to the more...
I am concerned about it. I guess I have a glass half full kind of disposition that I think everything will be okay. However, I have a great fear that I'm going to be the first to air some sort of deep fake video that we say is real.
Yeah.
They're
getting really good.
Really good. I'm scared of that. I don't want to be that person. I don't want that to happen. I am frightened. We talked about a scam where people can take a clip of my voice and have a fake Dana call Peter and say, she's being held hostage, give us $100,000. And how do you not know that that's real? I mean, so I am concerned. I don't want to be one of those people who says generationally that I'm worried about the next generation because of the technology that's coming, but I am kind of worried.
I mean, I think that's one of the existential things we face, right? Because it's like the old Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote, or they at least attributed to him, from a senator from New York, who was like, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts.
Right.
And now we live in a world where like we all sort of have our own facts, unfortunately, because we all live in these content bubbles.
Yeah, and I think about Kellyanne Conway, who said, well, there are alternative facts. I think she meant there are additional facts.
Yeah.
But that stuck for a while.
One more question on politics here, and then I want to get back to the book. In talking to White House officials, one thing that struck them about the second term of Trump versus the first term is just the speed, the pace that things are going. And they, say like, listen, we're up against the gun here because like we got midterms next year. We can only accomplish so much in a short period of time. The alternate version of it is like Steve Bannon, which is like flood the zone with, I won't use the term, to basically overwhelm the media so you can accomplish what you do. What do you make? I mean, having lived that life, now watching what they're doing, also seeing that like in moving so quickly, like people are getting fired who need to be called back, right? Yeah. The tariff thing, like, and I'm curious as to like how you view that from the communications perspective of how that was rolled out.
Yeah.
What do you make of what we've been watching here these first 100 days?
So I do think they're in a hurry. I think they are much more professionalized than they were before. They knew what they wanted to do. They were fully prepared. I still think about how like the Kamala Harris switcheroo was, it was so inept. And here you have the Trump administration, like, here are the things that we are actually going to do. Believe us when we say we are going to do this. And if you cared about immigration and a secure border, and you look within the first 60 days, it's solved. That's pretty impressive. On the tariff front, I always think it's very important to try to very clearly communicate what is the problem we are trying to solve. Okay? I don't think we got there because tariffs have always, I'm a skeptic on tariffs. I'm a Thomas Sowell kind of conservative when it comes to free market type of things. I agree that we should try to have free trade wherever possible. Trade barriers are not good. Trade deficits, I don't think that has made sense. And in fact, I've asked people about that. I'm like, how is it possible? How could Vietnam possibly buy as much from us as we buy from them?
How could Madagascar? They sell vanilla.
It doesn't make sense, and they're going to have to climb down from that. Yeah. So I think that in some ways they moved too fast. But tariffs aside, they have a lot that they want to get done. They have a lot of problems that they're trying to solve. I don't think they need to be in as big a hurry as they've been. I mean, the midterms are a long way off, except that, two things. They're a long way off. But if the country is going to go through some sort of economic shock, I guess you would want to have it now so that you go into your second year of your second term in a stronger economic position.
Hopefully that whatever shock you gave the system.
But who can gauge that? I don't think that necessarily pencils out. I also noticed this. I read a ton, and there are many, many times when the article will say the White House did not return a call for comment. Now, partly I think that is because they, one, don't have an answer yet, or two, there's an adversarial feeling with that paper. But I also think it's because they just have so much incoming, and the press. The best thing that happens to them is that Trump comes on board, and now everybody wants to consume everything, and they're clicking on all sorts of things. So people are making money again in the media, and that's not a bad thing either. So there's a naturally. One of
the ironies of Trump is that as much as the media, pushes back on him, that he's sort of their best friend.
And he kind of loves it, and they kind of love it. And so...
Right, there was that photo of Trump over the weekend holding up the New York Post as he was like headed to the golf course and reading about himself.
Yeah, sure. Needs to be aware. What are they saying? What are the people saying?
But your old boss, Bush, wasn't like that, right? How much did he read of his own media coverage?
A lot more than you'd think.
Really?
But he had a very high tolerance for negative media attention. And he didn't try to respond to a news cycle. We could have used maybe a little bit more of that every once in a while, just for my taste, right? Just to help me get through the day. But he had a rule that whenever somebody got back to their desk, if I had called and I needed something, I was the first person they were to respond to. Because they knew how hard my job was. And Candy Wolf ran legislative affairs. Same instructions for her. So there was a great premium placed on the value of media relations and legislative affairs. And I think that is so true with this group. And they have such a much more active cabinet. Let me ask you something. You're in the news business. You might know the answer to this, but let me ask. You name the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture under Joe Biden.
I keep wanting to say Harkin, someone from Iowa,
I mean,
right?
That's not a terrible guess. It was former Governor Vilsack.
Vilsack. Okay, so Iowa. Yeah.
you go back and look at the news clips. Nothing for 4 years. Nothing. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And now you have problems that could get solved. At least people are willing to take the questions, even if the answers aren't great. They might not have great answers yet, but they are trying to get there. Mm-hmm. Something to be said about how this administration is willing at least to get on the phone or get in front of the camera and do the interview.
One question I get all the time, and I'm curious, Dana, I know you have a glass half full disposition. What is the health of our democracy? And I say that because we've seen the kind of challenging of the checks and balances,
Mm-hmm.
And we saw John Roberts, the Chief Justice, kind of put out that statement a couple of weeks ago, sort of unprecedented, pushing back. And so what is, from your viewpoint, like, are you worried about America as we...
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, because even in 2020, the system held. In 2024, the election was decisive. You've had now just a court challenge after John Roberts said, whoa, we don't need to impeach every judge who you disagree with. Mm-hmm. Guess what happened to that very judge today? Got overturned. Right? So the system works. Our founders were very brilliant.
Which is what Roberts was saying. Roberts was like, let the system work.
Let the system work.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the administration is going to win every case at the Supreme Court. They won't. But to me, the system holds. I feel like the question of polarization in America is just too big for me to answer myself.
Yeah.
So this is what I recommend in the book. This is what I try to say even for my own life. Am I being the best possible citizen I can be today? Am I the best role model that I can be today? Am I the best neighbor that I can be today? The best colleague, the best daughter, sister, wife, all of those things. Best friend that I can be today. And I think that's all that we can do.
In fact, if we all did that, we probably would be better off.
If we all did that, it would be better. But asking this question of like, what are we going to do about polarization in America? It's just like, well, it's just too big. Yeah. I don't know how to solve that problem. But if each of us took individual responsibility for it, then everything would get better.
Getting back to the book, mm-hmm. I was struck by Mike Rowe's comments about curiosity. And that's a general theme.
Bill Hemmer brings it up too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, in the book, yeah.
The importance of being curious. And that one of the problems I think we face collectively sometimes is the lack of curiosity people have about other views, how they got there. And actually, I think it partially answers the question of polarization. Oftentimes people are like, how am I going to deal with Thanksgiving with my family members? It's like, be curious about how they got to that, as mm-hmm. opposed to immediately fighting them on something, mm-hmm. is ask questions about why they think that. I'm curious as to what you learned about curiosity and what you've learned about curiosity throughout your career and what some of these folks told you.
Gutfeld and I talk about how, can you imagine if we had YouTube when we were kids? I mean, we used to have to go and get the encyclopedia and look up elephants, right? And read about the elephants.
I'm an elder millennial, Dana. We still had to do that. I had to go get the World Book or Britannica.
Love that, right? And
Love the World Book.
And now all of us are like, hey Siri, how old is Liam Neeson again? And it's probably gonna tell us. I think what they mean about being curious is that it keeps your mind healthy, it keeps your heart open, and it will help you get better jobs and have better relationships in your life. So the curiosity comes up quite a bit. I have a lot of it. And I think one of my big problems, Mo, is that I wake up every day feeling like I know less than the day before. And it's a race. Like, I got to learn, I got to do more, I got to read more, I got to listen more, I got to do all these things.
Do we think it's the social media? We think it's devices?
No, I think that's how I've been my entire life.
You're just wired that way.
I am, because I want to know. And one of my rules as press secretary was that I should never be surprised by something somebody else brings up in the briefing room, ever. So my deputy
said, it's a very high bar to hold yourself to.
And if you do that, you can meet it. But here's the great thing. Everybody in the briefing room knew that was my standard for myself. Mm-hmm. So they all knew that I had the answers. And if I didn't have it, I would get back to them. And I always got back to them. And one of my great joys is President Bush will say that he was never surprised by a question at a briefing when I did the pre-brief. And it was because I cared about what the reporters had to do that day. They have a job too. I would be curious about what they were writing. And even if it had nothing to do with the White House, I would read their work and comment on it and build relations. They call it public relations for a reason. Having those kinds of friendships, even if it's just a professional friendship and an understanding, even if it's adversarial, to have that is great. And I think one of the great things about new media and podcasts in particular is you could have longer form conversations that people are hungry for. The growth in podcast viewing and listening, but viewing as well, which I think is a little strange for me because I like to listen, but viewing is way, way up. And people will sit and look and watch us have this conversation as if this is novel or new or even interesting, but people are hungry for it. And so
it's a return
to give it to them.
OG. I mean, this was the format 100 years ago.
And that's why I think that we have to have faith that everything will be okay.
Well, I like having that optimism. I think it's super important in these times. And I try to reinforce that. And that was actually the theme of your last book, right? Everything will be okay.
Well, partly because young people, especially young women, are worrying themselves to death. And it's not helping advance their careers at all. I worried away my 20s. And my hope for all of them
was You think it's more unique to women?
I guess I think that because they come and tell me that. Maybe guys don't. Mm-hmm. Although when my husband read Everything Will Be Okay, I'll never forget. He finished and he goes, wow, women spend a lot of time thinking. It's like, in fact, you guys think more about what men are thinking than men spend thinking. So yes, I think women think a little bit more about all of these things. But what I wanted to tell them is that, first of all, if you are an educated American, you've already won life's great lottery. So you have to decide, what do you want to do? How hard are you willing to work? And are you open to not having a plan that is so rigid that you can be open-minded to what else might be out there, like being at a hockey game and being asked if I would be interested in a press secretary position for a congressman from Colorado. And at first I was like, well, I couldn't possibly because I just took this other job. And having a mentor who said, you have no idea how this place works. Let me help you. So one of the reasons I wrote that is, let me help you. My mom, she read Everything Will Be Okay. And she called me and she said, I wish someone had told me. So that's how we got the title of this one too.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple inherent lessons in there. One, I heard in there, and that's actually one of the lessons I learned. My first job at Fox News Channel for Chris Wallace was like, do your homework, do your research, like know everything that is possible to know. There was a lot of pressure on those Sunday morning shows about like. And
especially for him.
Yeah.
High standards.
He holds himself to very high standards.
He learned it from his dad.
I remember talking to him after that first debate.
Yeah.
Where,
Trump and Biden.
Yeah. Where it did not
No,
go.
Trump and Hillary.
Trump and Hillary. Wait, was it Trump and Hillary?
Yeah.
Trump and Hillary.
Yeah.
Where it did not go. No, it was Trump and Biden 2020, where it did not go to plan, where he was the interrupting debate.
Oh, 2020.
2020.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember and I looked, and knowing him, he had this huge binder, and I was like, I know how well prepared he was for that, and how disappointing that must have been for him, personally.
Yeah. Well, your career is exciting to watch.
Thank you, Dana.
And thank you for helping others too.
Thank you for helping others. I appreciate this book. I appreciate the advice. I think there's so many important lessons from a variety of people. And honestly, some lessons came out of left field. I was like, who said that? Oh, that's it's fascinating when you actually ask people some of these questions. So
yeah, how about Jesse Waters talking about the Stoics?
That's where I was thinking. I was like, let me. Wait, is that attached to Jesse?
He does a lot of
again?
reading. He does a lot of thinking. Yes.
All right. You just got to reflect that
My little
more
Jesse Waters.
on the 5.
Yeah.
Quote the Stoics.
He's always thinking.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.